I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
Okay.
Put yourself right in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. It is December 1942.
Oh, wow. Prime U-boat season.
Exactly. You are exactly 700 miles off the freezing coast of Scotland. And, like, the air out here, it isn't just cold. It has that really sharp biting quality, where it feels like inhaling shattered glass.
Yeah, that absolute bone-chilling dampness.
Right. And the wind's just howling at gale force. It's whipping the sea into this incredibly violent, chaotic frenzy of white foam and pitch black water.
A literal nightmare scenario.
It really is.
Yeah.
So imagine looking up from the surface of that freezing water. Looming out of the absolute suffocating darkness of this wartime night is a ship.
But I mean, not just a regular ship, right?
No. This is this massive, unescorted, gray Leviathan, and it is completely blacked out.
Because of the submarines.
Right. No running lights, zero glow from the portholes. It is just a towering shadow running totally blind and silent through waters that are absolutely infested with German U-boats.
Moving fast, too.
Oh, yeah. She is moving at a desperate, neck-breaking speed of over 30 knots.
It's just such a chilling mental image. And if you could actually look inside the belly of that steel beast, the reality is even more intense.
How did you mean?
Well, packed into the hollowed-out interior of that ship so tightly that they are practically breathing each other's exhaled air are over 11,000 human beings.
11,000? That's a small city.
Exactly. And these are soldiers. They're sleeping on the bare decks, crammed into the corridors. They're even huddled inside empty-out swimming pools.
That is grim.
And every single one of them is just lying there listening to the constant, agonizing groaning of the hull.
Yeah.
Because the ship is just fighting against the sheer kinetic violence of the ocean.
I mean, put yourself in one of those canvas bunks, You're in the pitch dark. You feel the massive vibrations of the engines transferring through the steel right into your spine.
Yeah.
And, for an absolute fact that silent submarines are hunting you down there.
It's pure claustrophobia.
It is. It's a scene of pure terror. And then out of that freezing darkness, the unthinkable happens.
The wave.
A wave, a rogue wave. This freak towering wall of solid water that they estimated to be 92 feet high. It rises straight up from the abyss.
92 feet. That is like a 9-story building.
Yeah. And it slams directly into the starboard side of the vessel. The impact is just catastrophic. Tens of thousands of tons of steel violently roll to the side.
Which is terrifying in the dark.
Oh, completely. The ship tilts to a horrifying 52 degrees.
Wow.
Inside, guys are being thrown against bulkheads like rag dolls. Heavy equipment is shattering everywhere. And here's the craziest part. If this colossal vessel rolls just 3 degrees more, just 3 tiny degrees, gravity is going to win.
It would just go all the way over.
Exactly. The ship will capsize, and over 11,000 souls will be dragged down into the freezing black depths in a matter of minutes.
The sheer scale of that near miss is just, it's paralyzing to even think about.
It is.
What makes this so compelling, though, is that we aren't just setting the scene for some fictional horror story here.
No, not at all.
This actually happened. The ship at the center of this absolute nightmare was the RMS Queen Mary.
Which is wild, right? Because when you say Queen Mary to someone today, their mind does not go to oceanic terror.
No, they think of luxury.
Exactly. They picture that stationary floating hotel that's docked permanently down in Long Beach, California. A tourist spot where you can take a guided tour, maybe grab a martini in a preserved Art Deco lounge.
Hear a spooky ghost story or two.
Right. But that stationary hotel is, in reality, a heavily scarred survivor of the ocean's darkest horrors.
It really is. The vessel sitting in that California sun is a ship that outran packs of hunting submarines.
Yeah.
It's a ship that caused one of the most gruesome, deeply controversial maritime disasters of the Second World War.
And it's a ship that now basically sits in this strange, agonizing purgatory.
Yeah, being consumed by this awful combination of municipal bankruptcy, severe structural rot, and some deeply unnerving psychological phenomena.
And that is our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into the harrowing, near-fatal, and often super tragic history of the Queen Mary.
We're going to cover it all.
Yeah, we're going to reconstruct her most terrifying encounters at sea, track how she went from this massive weapon of war to a decaying modern horror story, and we'll try to understand the eerie, almost psychological grip this labyrinth of rusted steel holds over anyone who walks its halls today.
I love it. And I think to really grasp the darkness of her later life, we have to we have to look at the environment that forged her.
The Great Depression.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Before the Queen Mary ever faced the horrors of the North Atlantic, she was born out of the horrors of a collapsing global economy.
Right.
Her conception was driven by this fierce, almost like hubristic race for maritime dominance right in the teeth of the Great Depression.
The atmosphere of the late 1920s and early 30s is so crucial
It
here.
really is.
I mean, the world is falling apart financially. Millions are out of work. Breadlines are forming everywhere.
But out on the ocean,
Right, out on the ocean, there is this relentless, arrogant race among nations to build the biggest, fastest thing that can possibly float.
yeah, Germany was dominating the seas at the time with these massive ships, the Bremen and the Europa,
And Britain is just steadily losing the shipbuilding race.
which was unacceptable to them.
Totally. For an island nation whose entire identity, whose entire empire is built on naval supremacy, being second best on the water is psychologically devastating.
It was a deeply bruised point of national pride.
Yeah.
So the Cunard Line, which is Britain's premier shipping company, they draw up plans to reclaim the throne.
They decide to go big.
Oh, huge.
Mm.
They design a 75,000-ton Leviathan. But at this early stage, she doesn't even have a name.
Right, she's just a number.
Yeah, she is simply designated hull number 534.
Hull 534.
Construction begins in December of 1930 at the John Brown and Company shipyard. That's up in Clydebank, Scotland.
And the scale of this thing was insane.
Mind-boggling. The engineers actually had to specifically deepen and widen the River Clyde itself just to accommodate the massive displacement of her hull.
Just so the river could hold her. That's wild.
Yeah.
But ambition only gets you so far when the banks run dry.
Yeah, the money dried up fast.
By December 1931, the Great Depression really sinks its teeth into Britain, and the money simply runs out. Construction stops entirely.
Imagine being a shipyard worker in Clydebank then.
It must have been devastating. Your livelihood is just gone. And for years, this unfinished skeletal steel hull just sits there on the slipway.
Just rotting in the rain.
Exactly. It becomes this massive, silent monument to failed ambition. Rusting in the freezing Scottish weather, it looked like a Leviathan's ribcage. It's almost like a graveyard before the ship is even born.
The psychological toll on that town was immense. That rotting steel skeleton sat there until the British government finally decided the national embarrassment was just too great.
They couldn't take the hit to their pride anymore.
Right. So they stepped in with a massive loan to finish the job.
Oh,
But, as you know, governments don't just hand out money without strings.
never.
That loan came with a brutal forced condition. Cunard was mandated to merge with its bitterest rival, the White Star Line.
Wait, the same White Star Line that built the Titanic?
The very same.
Wow.
White Star was drowning financially, too. They had already been forced to cancel their own massive superliner project, which was going to be called the Oceanic.
So they were desperate.
Totally desperate. So out of sheer financial terror and corporate desperation, the Cunard White Star Line is formed in 1934. And the rusting bones of Hull 534 finally start getting fleshed out with steel plating.
Which brings up, honestly, one of the most fascinating pieces of corporate lore, specifically regarding her name.
Oh, this story is amazing.
It's a story of profound awkwardness. So Cunard traditionally named all their ships with words ending in "ia," right?
Yeah. Lusitania, Mauretania, Aquitania.
Exactly. The rumor is they fully intended to name this new ship the Queen Victoria, keeping with the ia tradition while honoring a beloved monarch.
Thanks, perfect sense.
So the company executives secure an audience with King George V to formally ask his permission to name the ship after Britain's greatest queen.
But there's a miscommunication.
The huge one. The problem is, King George hears greatest queen and immediately assumes these shipping executives are talking about his own wife, Queen Mary of Teck.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He lights up and tells them how absolutely delighted she will be by the honor.
I always try to put myself in that room when I hear this story. You are a shipping executive in the 1930s. The King of England has just made a massive ego-driven assumption.
Right. What do? You can't exactly clear your throat and say, actually, Your Majesty, we meant your grandmother.
No, definitely not.
What does that tell us about the power dynamics of the era? It's a masterclass in corporate deference to the monarchy. You just have to pivot, smile, and swallow your entire branding strategy.
Yep. So Hull 534 becomes the RMS Queen Mary.
Incredible.
And when she finally launched, she was a staggering achievement of brute force engineering. It took 18 heavy drag chains, these massive anchors tearing up the riverbed, just to slow her immense weight down as she slid down the slipway into the Clyde.
But even then, she wasn't alone at the top.
No, she faced immediate fierce competition because the French had entered the race.
The SS Normandy. I've actually seen photos of the Normandy, and honestly, she looks like a spaceship compared to the Queen Mary.
The Normandy was a masterpiece, just an ultra-modern design. She featured a revolutionary streamlined, clipper-shaped bow. Think of, like, a knife slicing cleanly through the water.
Right.
The Queen Mary, by contrast, was heavily criticized by naval architects for being way too traditional. She had a conservative hull, a straight stem, and a cruiser stern. She essentially looked like a massively enlarged pre-World War I liner.
So if the Normandy is aerodynamically and hydrodynamically superior, how did the Queen Mary even compete?
Through sheer, unadulterated brute force.
Really? Just power.
Yep. The clipper bow of the Normandy was elegant and reduced drag, but the traditional heavier hull of the Queen Mary housed engines of terrifying power. The British built her to punch through the Atlantic weather, not just glide over it.
Oh, ice.
And despite the critics calling her old-fashioned, that brute force strategy worked. The Queen Mary won the Blue Ribbon, which is the ultimate prize for the fastest transatlantic crossing away from the Normandy in 1936.
Wow.
The two ships traded the record back and forth for a bit, but the Queen Mary snatched it back permanently in 1938 and held it for 14 straight years.
That is wild. And she wasn't just fast either. She was a literal floating palace designed to totally insulate the ultra-wealthy from the harsh reality of the ocean.
Oh, the luxury was insane.
The interior featured exotic woods sourced from all across the British Empire. She had air-conditioned public rooms, which was an unimaginable luxury at the time, 2 indoor swimming pools, a music studio, dedicated dog kennels.
And the dining room?
Oh, the centerpiece, a 3-story main dining room.
And the focal point of that dining room was this gigantic illuminated mural mapping the transatlantic crossing.
Right. And during the voyage, this small motorized crystal model of the ship would physically travel along the map on a little track.
So cool.
So you could just sit there eating your caviar and watch exactly where you were in the middle of the ocean. It's absurdly opulent, but there's a detail in her design that reveals a much deeper, much darker historical current running beneath all that luxury.
You're referring to the prayer room.
Yeah. The Queen Mary was the first ocean liner in history to feature a dedicated Jewish prayer room.
Right.
And this isn't just an architectural footnote. When you consider the timeline, the mid to late 1930s, this is a deliberate, quiet act of corporate defiance.
Absolutely.
The British shipping lines are watching the rising tide of fascism and violent anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany. By installing that room, they are making a subtle but very permanent statement in steel and wood about who is welcome on their ship right as the world is fracturing.
It's such a powerful detail. And the reason we really need to linger on the sheer opulence of these woods, the tapestries, the silver services, and the highly civilized nature of her design is because it sets up a deeply unsettling psychological contrast.
It makes what happens next so much worse.
Exactly. The luxury makes the ship's impending transformation so much more jarring. We're about to watch this pinnacle of human leisure be brutally stripped down and turned into a desperate weapon of war.
So September 1939, World War II erupts. The Queen Mary is in the middle of a voyage and suddenly finds herself stranded in New York Harbor, tied up right next to her rival, the Normandy.
Just sitting there.
Yeah. Eventually, she receives classified orders to sail to Sydney, Australia. And this is where the visceral surgery begins. The luxury isn't just removed, it is brutally ripped away.
They gutted her.
Completely. 6 miles of plush carpet, 220 cases of crystal and china, the priceless tapestries, the art, all of it is crated up and thrown into warehouses. They take this beautiful, vibrant vessel and paint the hull, the superstructure, the funnels entirely in a sinister, dull, navy gray.
She became known as the Great Ghost. But the transformation wasn't just cosmetic, right? The military engineers wrapped a massive degaussing coil entirely around the outside of her outer hull.
See, I've always found degaussing so fascinating. It sounds like science fiction. How exactly does wrapping a wire around a ship protect it?
Right, so to understand the coil, you have to understand the weapon it was designed to defeat, the magnetic mine.
Okay.
The oceans were heavily seeded with these mines by the Germans. Now, unlike a contact mine, which a ship has to physically bump into.
So ones with the little spikes on them.
Exactly. Unlike those, a magnetic mine sits quietly below the surface. When a massive steel object like an 80,000-ton ocean liner passes over it, the ship's natural magnetic field disrupts the Earth's magnetic field in that specific spot. The mine's sensor detects that disruption and detonates, blowing the ship's keel out from underneath it.
So the ship's own mass is what actually triggers its destruction?
Exactly. So the degaussing coil is essentially a massive electrical cable. By running a very specific, continuous electrical current through this coil, the engineers created an electromagnetic field that essentially canceled out the ship's natural magnetic signature.
That is brilliant.
It rendered her magnetically invisible to the mines below.
Wow. But, I mean, she might have been invisible to the mines, but she was glaringly obvious to the U-boat.
Oh, for sure. And her mission quickly became one of the most terrifying, high-stakes assignments of the entire war.
Because she was converted into a troop ship.
Right. All that vast, empty space where the luxury ballrooms and dining halls used to be was filled with triple-tiered wooden bunks. Later, those were replaced by these fold-up canvas standee bunks.
Just cramming them in.
Yeah. Her new job was to transport up to 15,000 soldiers at a single time across oceans that were actively patrolled by German wolf packs. You know, submarines hunting in coordinated, deadly groups.
15,000 men. I want us to really pause and sit with the claustrophobia of this reality.
It's hard to fathom.
If you are one of those soldiers, you are likely sleeping on the open deck because there's literally no room left inside the suffocating, humid hull. You are staring out at the black water night after night.
In total darkness.
Yes. The ship is completely blacked out. You can't even light a cigarette because a single match flare can be seen for miles through a periscope.
Yeah.
And you know that silent, deadly submarines are down there in the dark listening to the thrum of your engines. The psychological pressure of waiting for a torpedo to tear through the steel beneath your feet. It's just unimaginable.
And the stakes couldn't have been higher.
Yeah.
Adolf Hitler was acutely aware of the massive strategic threat the Queen Mary and her sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth, posed to his war effort.
They were changing the game.
Absolutely. These two ships were single-handedly moving entire Allied armies across the globe. They were shifting the balance of power. So Hitler placed an absolute bounty on her head.
Really? A bounty?
Yes. He formally offered 1 million Reichsmarks and the oak leaves to the Knight's Cross, which was Germany's highest military honor, to any U-boat captain who could successfully send the Queen Mary to the bottom of the sea.
1 million Reichsmarks and ultimate glory just to sink the ship you are desperately trying to sleep on. What bogles my mind is that she frequently traveled completely alone.
Yeah, unescorted.
You would think a ship carrying 15,000 troops, a prime target for Hitler, would have a massive armada of naval escorts surrounding her.
It seems counterintuitive, I know, but an escort would have actually signed her death warrant.
Because of her speed?
Exactly. She was simply too fast. Escort ships, like heavily armored destroyers or cruisers, couldn't maintain her 30-knot speed, especially in rough, heavy seas. If the Queen Mary slowed down to match their pace, she would become an easy, lingering target for a U-boat. Her only true defense was pure, unadulterated kinetic speed, combined with a terrifying navigational tactic known as zigzagging.
The zigzag. Let's break down why that works.
Sure. So, a U-boat torpedo is an unguided weapon. To hit a target, the U-boat captain has to calculate the torpedo's trajectory based on the target ship's current speed and its heading.
It's complex trigonometry.
Exactly. By traveling at over 30 knots and violently changing course at random, unpredictable intervals, the Queen Mary made those mathematical calculations almost impossible to finalize.
That makes sense.
By the time the submarine captain figured out where she was going, she had already violently shifted her rudder and was heading somewhere else, rapidly moving out of torpedo range. It was this relentless, high-stakes game of cat and mouse.
And it was a game she came horrifyingly close to losing. In May of 1944, a German submarine, U-853, actually spotted the Grey Ghost.
Oh, that was a close one.
Put yourself in that U-boat. The captain looks through the periscope and sees the ultimate prize. He orders a crash dive to position for an attack. The torpedo tubes are flooded.
They're ready to fire.
They are. But the Queen Mary is moving with such ferocious, thundering speed that she literally outruns the submarine's mechanical ability to aim and fire.
Incredible.
By the time the German crew has their firing solution ready, the Queen Mary is just gone. She's just a wake of white foam disappearing over the horizon. Pure speed is the only thing that saved those thousands of lives.
But here is the tragic irony of the Queen Mary's wartime service.
Yeah.
That exact same speed, the massive momentum keeping tens of thousands of men alive, ultimately caused one of the most horrific and controversial maritime disasters of the entire war.
Which brings us to October 1942. This is where the story shifts from like a survival thriller to deep visceral tragedy.
So dark.
It's October 2nd. The Queen Mary is off the coast of Ireland. She is packed to the brim with thousands of infantry division heading over to join the Allied forces in Europe. She is performing her violent zigzag maneuvers.
But this time, she actually does have an escort.
Right. She is being accompanied by an older World War I era light cruiser called the HMS Curaçao.
The Curaçao's job was to stay ahead of the massive liner to provide anti-aircraft cover against German bombers as they neared the British Isles.
Makes sense.
But coordinating a chaotic zigzag pattern between two ships of vastly different sizes and speeds requires flawless communication. And on that day, there was a fatal breakdown.
A misunderstanding.
A huge one. The captain of the Curaçao believed the Queen Mary would follow standard naval protocol and alter her course to avoid the escort.
Okay.
The captain of the Queen Mary, Gordon Illingsworth, believed the smaller escort would naturally give way to his massive, less maneuverable vessel.
And on the ocean, physics does not care about rank or protocol.
No, it does not.
You have a 10,000-ton light cruiser and an 80,000-ton steel leviathan hurtling toward each other. The inertia involved is just unstoppable.
At exactly 2:12 p.m., their paths intersected.
Try to conceptualize the sheer violence of this impact. The Queen Mary's massive axe-like bow, driven by engines pushing 80,000 tons at 28 knots, slices directly into the thin armored side of the HMS Curaçao.
It's horrific.
It doesn't just hit the cruiser, it cleaves it cleanly in two. It's like a meat cleaver going through a tin can.
Yeah.
Imagine the deafening screech of tearing metal, the catastrophic explosion of the cruiser's high-pressure steam pipes, the instantaneous rush of freezing Atlantic water flooding the lower decks.
The destruction was absolute.
Mm-hmm.
The Curaçao sank in a matter of minutes. 338 men were either thrown into the freezing Atlantic or trapped inside the sinking halves of the crushed cruiser.
And here is the chilling reality. This is where the true psychological horror of war sets in. Captain Illingsworth, commanding the Queen Mary, is under absolute strict Admiralty orders.
Oh, the orders.
Because of the constant looming threat of U-boats, which would almost certainly be lured by the deafening noise of the collision, he is ordered never to stop. Under any circumstance.
That's an impossible, nightmarish decision.
Yeah.
If he stops his massive ship to lower lifeboats and rescue the drowning men of the Curaçao, he makes the Queen Mary a stationary target.
Right.
He risks the lives of 10,000 American troops. A single torpedo strike, while they are stopped, would result in the greatest maritime loss of life in human history. So the cold, brutal mathematics of war takes over. You cannot risk 10,000 to save 300.
So, with her own bow severely fractured and taking on water, the Queen Mary's engines keep turning.
She just keeps going.
She steams onward. She leaves them behind. Put yourself in the shoes of a crew member on the aft decks of the Queen Mary.
That would mess you up forever.
You are gripping the rail, looking down at the swirling, freezing water, watching hundreds of Allied sailors men whose sole job was to protect you drowning in your churning wake. You can hear them screaming for help, and the massive propellers beneath you just keep pushing you forward, abandoning them to the ocean.
The psychological weight of that moment is unimaginable.
Mm.
To be the physical instrument of their death, and then to be forced by military order to just abandon them.
There's actually a historical debate about what happened next.
Oh, right, regarding the rescue.
Yeah. Some accounts suggest that hours later, the lead escort ships, upon realizing what happened, returned to the site and managed to rescue 99 survivors, including the Curaçao's captain, John Boutwood.
Right.
But the Queen Mary's staff captain later claimed that Captain Illingsworth immediately broke radio silence to order accompanying destroyers to look for survivors. Regardless of the exact timeline of the rescue effort, 338 men died in agonizing fashion.
That tragedy highlights a terrifying truth about our relationship with the sea. The Queen Mary was a marvel of human technology. She was a fast, heavily armored weapon of war. But she was still entirely subject to the chaotic, unforgiving physics of the ocean.
Absolutely.
And that vulnerability was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt just 2 months later.
Right. December 1942. We're back to the scene we opened this deep dive with, the 92-foot wall of water.
She was carrying 11,339 people, soldiers, and crew. They were 700 miles off the coast of Scotland, battling a massive winter gale. And then, completely without warning, the rogue waves struck.
Let's pause and talk about the science of rogue waves, because for a long time they were considered folklore.
Oh, totally. Just sailors' tall tales.
Right. For centuries, traumatized sailors would return to port and tell stories of these monstrous vertical walls of water that appear out of nowhere in the open ocean. And for decades, oceanographers and scientists dismissed them as maritime myths or hallucinations brought on by exhaustion.
They thought waves simply couldn't physically reach those heights without breaking.
But they are entirely real.
They are. They occur through a process called constructive interference.
How does that work?
Well, when multiple different wave systems moving in different directions happen to converge at the exact right moment, they're kinetic energy compounds. They stack on top of each other, creating one catastrophic spike, a transient, massive wall of water that exists for only a few minutes before collapsing.
And the Queen Mary took a 28-meter wave directly to her starboard broadside.
The physics of that impact are staggering. The wave forced the 80,000-ton ship into a violent 52-degree roll.
To really visualize that, if you are standing in a corridor, the floor suddenly tilts so violently that it becomes a steep, slippery cliff, and the wall literally becomes the floor.
To understand why this was almost the end of the Queen Mary, we have to look at how a ship stays upright. It's a battle between the center of gravity, which is pushing down, and the center of buoyancy, the force of the water pushing up. Think of a ship like one of those Weeble toys for children. You know the ones.
Yeah, they wobble, but they don't fall down.
Right. The heavy engines and the keel act as a massive counterweight at the bottom. When a wave pushes the ship over, that heavy keel swings out to the side like a pendulum, creating a righting lever that pulls the ship back upright.
But there's a limit to how far that pendulum can swing before it works against you, right?
Exactly. The engineers who analyzed the event later calculated the ship's specific stability parameters. They determined that at 52 degrees, the ship's righting lever was at its absolute maximum strain.
Wow.
If the Queen Mary had rolled just 3 degrees further hitting 55 degrees, her center of gravity would have shifted past the center of buoyancy. The pendulum would have crossed the point of no return. Gravity would have taken over, pulling the top of the ship down into the ocean. She would have capsized.
Dr. Norval Carter, who was part of a hospital unit on board, survived the roll and wrote a letter detailing the horror. He said, "One moment the top deck was at its usual height, and then swoom, down, over and forward she would pitch.
That swoon sound, horrifying.
Inside the ship, it must have been absolute pandemonium. Total darkness because of the blackout. Thousands of men, heavy equipment and loose gear sliding down the corridors, smashing into the bulkheads.
The terrifying groan of the steel hull flexing under the immense pressure.
Everyone on board would have thought, this is it. The ship is going over. And then, agonizingly slowly, the heavy keel did its job, and the ship shuddered back upright.
It is a profound reminder of human fragility. We build these impenetrable fortresses of steel, we arm them, we fill them with our armies, and the ocean simply shrugs, throws a freak wave at it, and comes within 3 degrees of wiping 11,000 lives off the earth in a fraction of a second. It is a genuine miracle she survived.
But she did survive. She pushed through the rest of the war, constantly defying the odds. In July of 1943, she carried 16,683 people on a single voyage.
That number is just insane.
Let that sink in. 16,683. That is a record that still stands today for the most people ever carried on one vessel at the same time.
And they could only do that in the summer.
Yeah, you literally could only achieve that density in the summer months because thousands of men had to sleep shoulder to shoulder on the open decks. If it rained, they just got wet.
Her speed and capacity made her so vital to the war effort that Winston Churchill actually used her for highly secretive transatlantic voyages to meet with Allied officials.
Really?
Yeah. To hide his presence, he traveled under the alias Colonel Worden. In 1943, he and his military staff were aboard, actively planning the invasion of Normandy.
No way.
He actually signed the D-Day Declaration while sailing on the Queen Mary. Churchill later stated on the record that without the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, the final victory against Hitler would have been unquestionably postponed.
So, the war finally ends. The Grey Ghost survives. She returns to port and gets a massive, expensive refit to return to civilian passenger service.
Right. Time to put the luxury back.
The gray paint is blasted off, the air conditioning is reinstalled, the thousands of canvas bunks are removed. The artist, Doris Zinkeisen, even returns to the ship to fix her beautiful mural in the veranda grill.
The one the officers ruined.
Yeah. During the war, military officers had carelessly tacked their navigational sea charts right into the priceless painting, leaving it riddled with holes.
And as a bit of quiet, artistic rebellion against the rigid corporate structure of Cunard, Zinkeisen secretly painted a tiny mouse into the restored mural.
Oh,
It was a petty, brilliant way to mock Cunard's proud, long-standing boast that they never had rodents on their pristine ships.
I absolutely love that detail. It's a little bit of playful vandalism to reclaim the ship's humanity after years of military austerity.
Which is great.
But as the 1950s roll in, the Queen Mary finds herself facing a new enemy. And this is one she cannot outrun. She beat the U-boats, she survived the 92-foot rogue wave, but she cannot beat the passage of time.
Or, more specifically, the invention of the commercial jet engine.
Exactly.
The turning point was 1958. That was the year the first commercial transatlantic jet flights began operating. Suddenly, the math of global travel changed overnight.
It was revolutionary.
You could travel from London to New York in 7 hours in a jet, instead of spending 5 days fighting the Atlantic weather on a ship. The demand for multi-day ocean crossings plummeted almost instantly.
The Queen Mary transformed from a vital national asset into an incredibly expensive dinosaur. The financial records from the era show that during the rough winter months, the Queen Mary would sometimes sail into New York Harbor with more crew members on board than paying passengers.
Just bleeding money.
She was burning massive amounts of fuel to carry empty ballrooms across the ocean.
By 1965, the entire Cunard fleet was hemorrhaging money. The ship was aging rapidly, her technology was terribly inefficient by modern standards, and the market had permanently shifted.
So they had to sell her.
The painful decision was made to retire her and sell her off. Japanese scrap merchants made highly lucrative bids, wanting to tow her to Asia and tear her apart for her massive steel hull.
But she avoided the scrapyard.
Right. The city of Long Beach, California, stepped in with a bid of $3.45 million, intending to turn her into a tourist attraction.
In 1967, she completes her 1,001st and final crossing. She sails around Cape Horn, completely bypassing the Panama Canal because she is too wide to fit through the locks, and finally arrives in Long Beach.
And this is where the story shifts again.
Drastically. And this is where the tone of the story changes completely. It goes from a gripping, heroic wartime survival thriller to a slow, agonizing horror story of structural decay and creeping neglect. The ship enters the purgatory of Long Beach.
When she arrived in California, the city didn't just dock her and open the doors. They subjected her to a massive, invasive, and ultimately destructive surgery.
They really did?
They wanted to convert her from a functional seafaring vessel into a stationary floating hotel and museum. To do that, they needed vast amounts of interior space.
What they did to the lower decks is tragic. Specifically C deck, which they later renamed R deck. They completely gutted it. They ripped out the bulkheads to make room for Jacques Cousteau's Living Sea Museum.
Which, ironically and tragically, failed within a decade because many of the marine life they housed in the museum died.
Why did they die? Was it the water quality?
It was a combination of factors, but largely it was the acoustic and vibratory environment.
What do you mean?
You are placing sensitive marine life inside a massive steel resonant chamber that is constantly vibrating from shoreside power generators, footsteps, and the shifting of the hull. It was a deeply unsuitable environment for a delicate aquarium.
But to build that failed museum, the city contractors ripped the literal heart and organs out of the Queen Mary. They removed all of her massive boiler rooms, the forward engine room, the turbo generators, and the ship's stabilizing gear.
They stripped thousands of tons of heavy machinery out of her belly.
Yes.
And this goes back to our earlier discussion about the Weeble toy and the center of gravity. When you remove that much massive weight from the bottom of a ship, you destroy her stability.
Oh, wow. I didn't think of that.
Without those engines acting as a counterweight, she would have rolled over and capsized right there at the dock.
Seriously.
Seriously. So to keep her upright, the engineers pumped the ship's hollowed-out, empty fuel tanks full of local Long Beach mud. They essentially packed her empty wounds with dirt just to keep her standing.
The removal of her engines actually triggered massive legal and regulatory disputes, too. The Coast Guard had to step in.
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
Because they ripped her propulsion systems out, the Coast Guard officially declared she was no longer legally a ship. She was reclassified as a building.
And as a building sitting in corrosive salt water, she suffered terribly. If you trace the chaotic chain of ownership over the decades, it reads like a masterclass in mismanagement.
Just one bad decision after another.
It was a revolving door of corporate masters who didn't understand the unique demands of maritime preservation. Diners Club tried to run her. Then Hyatt Hotels.
Mm.
Then Jack Rather, a local millionaire who brought the spruce Goose Howard Hughes' massive wooden plane to sit in a giant dome right next to her.
Then, unbelievably, the Walt Disney Company buys Rather's company in 1988.
Right.
For a brief window, Disney owned the Queen Mary. They had these grand sweeping plans to build a massive Port Disney theme park around her, featuring an ocean-themed park called Disney Sea.
But the local politics and the massive cost became too much. The plans fell through, Disney surrendered the lease in 1992, and the ship was closed indefinitely.
From there, the lease bounced to a local foundation, then to private developers, then to a management group called Save the Queen, then Delaware North, then Garrison Investment, then Evolution Hospitality, and finally a real estate investment trust called Urban Commons in 2016.
So many hands.
Every single transition meant a delay in critical maintenance. The rust never sleeps, but the funding constantly stalled.
Which leads us to the terrifying engineering reports of 2017 and 2019. Edward Pribonic, the independent engineer responsible for inspecting the ship on behalf of the city, issued a blistering report.
He didn't hold back.
Not at all. He stated on the record that the Queen Mary was in the absolute worst condition he had seen in his entire 25 years of inspecting her.
The details of the decay are frankly grotesque. The structural hull was severely corroding from the inside out. The supports for the raised exhibition areas were failing. There was significant standing water rotting away the deep bilges.
It gets worse.
Oh, I know. At one point, a pipe that had been flimsily patched together with duct tape finally burst, and the ship's grand ballroom, the site of so much historical elegance, flooded with raw sewage.
Ugh. Imagine the smell permeating those historic woods.
Right. Imagine the profound degradation of this once proud vessel, the ship that outran Hitler's wolf packs, now sitting stationary, slowly filling with excrement because of deferred maintenance.
And it wasn't just a matter of cosmetic decay, it was structurally critical. A 2015 Marine survey identified the ship's original lifeboats as a severe, immediate hazard.
The lifeboats?
Yes. Over the decades, they had heavily rotted, and the wood had soaked up tons of trapped rainwater. They became so incredibly heavy that they were threatening to tear the side shell of the ship apart.
Oh my God.
They were literally ripping the steel hull open under their own dead weight. The city had to urgently step in and physically demolish 11 of the historic lifeboats just to save the superstructure from cracking open.
I have to ask, how does a city let a historical monument get to the point where it might literally capsize at its own dock? An architecture firm hired by the city explicitly warned she was vulnerable to internal flooding or capsizing. How do you let a priceless artifact reach that state?
It comes down to the staggering, almost incomprehensible financial cost of maritime maintenance.
It's just a money pit.
Exactly. A ship sitting in salt water is in a constant state of being dissolved by the ocean. It's a chemical inevitability. By 2024, the city of Long Beach had spent $45 million just fixing the immediate critical threats to keep her from sinking at the mooring.
$45 million?
And the engineering estimates suggested hundreds of millions more were needed for a full structural remediation. It's a financial black hole. When Urban Commons, the last operator, filed for bankruptcy in 2021, the city was forced to take back total control just to prevent a catastrophic collapse.
So we're left with a ship that is a gutted, rusted, hollowed-out labyrinth. The engines are gone, the lower decks are pitch dark and filled with mud, the metal is groaning under its own weight as the tides shift.
It's incredibly eerie.
It is the perfect unnerving breeding ground for a very different kind of darkness.
Which brings us to the ethereal echoes, the psychological horror of the Queen Mary.
You cannot talk about this ship without talking about the ghosts. She is widely considered one of the most haunted places on Earth. Time magazine listed her in their top 10 haunted places.
Yeah, and when you dig into the specific legends, they are deeply unsettling.
Paranormal enthusiasts point to several specific hotbeds of activity throughout the ship. The first-class Queen's Salon, where multiple independent witnesses report seeing the Lady in White, an ethereal apparition in an evening gown dancing alone to silent music.
Then there is the dry first-class pool. It hasn't held a drop of water since the late 1980s, but visitors and night watchmen constantly report hearing the echoing, splashing laughter of ghostly children.
That is so creepy.
They report seeing phantom, wet footprints appearing out of nowhere on the dry deck tiles. And of course, Room B340, which has the highest volume of paranormal reports, slamming doors, lights flickering on and off independently, and disembodied voices waking people in the dead of night.
We also have to mention Shaft Alley and Door 13. This is one of the few paranormal legends tied to a documented historical death.
Right, the crewman.
Yeah. In 1966, a young 18-year-old crewman named John Petter was genuinely crushed to death by a massive watertight door 13 during a routine emergency drill. People claim to see his spirit still walking that dark mechanical corridor, dressed in blue coveralls.
Or the boiler room, where people report sudden, intense pockets of ghostly heat and shadowy figures darting behind the rusted machinery.
Now, I know skeptics have a field day with these stories. Joe Nickel, a senior research fellow at the Center for Inquiry, has investigated the ship and completely dismisses the hauntings as psychological projections.
Right. Nickel attributes the phenomena to pareidolia.
Pareidolia.
Yeah. This is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where the human mind perceives a specific, often meaningful image or sound in a completely random or ambiguous visual or audio pattern. Seeing faces in clouds is a classic example.
Oh, yeah.
He argues that maintenance workers and security guards doing repetitive, mindless chores in an eerie, decaying, dimly lit environment will naturally daydream. Their brains, seeking stimulation, will fill the dark shadows and the groans of the metal with ghosts.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, he points out there is no historical record of murders on board. While people did die over her decades of service, most deaths were from natural causes.
But I want to push back on that clinical explanation for a second. Consider the psychology of pareidolia in this specific environment. Doesn't that make it more terrifying?
How do you mean?
Think about it. The fact that this massive, gutted, dark steel labyrinth is so physically imposing, so dripping with atmosphere, that it literally breaks down your psychological defenses. The ship itself is driving you to see things in the dark. It's weaponizing your own brain against you.
That's a highly compelling argument. If we connect this back to the immense trauma the ship has witnessed, you don't need a literal supernatural ghost to feel haunted on the Queen Mary.
Exactly.
When you walk those dimly lit lower halls, you are walking through the physical space where the echoes of the Karakoa disaster still linger. You are standing on the exact spot where Captain Illingsworth stood when he had to abandon 338 drowning men.
Yeah.
You are walking the wooden decks where 15,000 terrified soldiers slept shoulder to shoulder, waiting for a German torpedo to tear them apart in the dark.
You are standing where the ship nearly rolled over and killed 11,000 people in a single heartbeat. The sheer, overwhelming weight of that concentrated human history is pressing down on you. The ship is a massive steel sponge for human terror and human desperation. You feel it in the air.
And now it is experiencing its own slow, humiliating death. The removal of its engines, the rotting of its hull, the filling of its tanks with mud, it has been lobotomized and left on display to decay.
That's such a sad way to put it.
The psychology of the hauntings is inextricably linked to the physical decay of the vessel. We are watching a giant die, a very public, undignified death, and our minds interpret that profound sadness, that liminal space between life and scrap, as supernatural activity.
So what does this all mean for us today? The Queen Mary is not just a collection of steel plates and Art Deco wood. She is a monument to the absolute fragility of the human experience when pitted against the relentless power of war, the passage of time, and most importantly, the unstoppable force of the ocean.
Well said.
She survived the economic devastation of the Great Depression. She survived Hitler's U-boats. She survived a 92-foot rogue wave. But she is struggling to survive the slow, creeping rust of a California harbor.
Which leaves us with a deeply haunting final reflection.
Yeah.
We humans, in our infinite hubris, build these massive, impenetrable fortresses of steel. We design them to conquer the oceans, to assert our dominance over nature. We try to preserve them forever to prove we won. But in preserving her this way, we have essentially trapped her in a state of suspended animation. There is an argument to be made that keeping a Leviathan like the Queen Mary gutted, packed with mud, and slowly rotting at a dock is a uniquely human cruelty.
That is heavy.
We strip these great ships of their purpose and force them into a humiliating decay, rather than letting them meet a dignified end at the breaker's yard or in the deep ocean where they belong. The sea always reclaims its own, whether through a violent wave or decades of quiet, microscopic rust.
So the next time you picture the Queen Mary, don't think of a sunny luxury hotel in Long Beach. Picture her in December of 1942. Pitch black, freezing, engines roaring, thousands of men holding their breath in the dark as a 92-foot wall of water rises up to swallow them whole.
That's the real Queen Mary.
And ask yourself, when you walk those decaying, rusted decks today, are you feeling the supernatural ghosts of the past? Or are you just feeling the slow, inevitable, tragic death of a giant that the ocean is finally coming to collect?